The island was barely a speck on the map, just 7 kilometers long, surrounded by nothing but endless blue. And yet, on this barren patch of volcanic ash, more American Marines would fall than on any other battlefield in the Pacific War. What made this tiny island so important that the United States was willing to sacrifice over 20,000 men to seize it? Why did Japan decide to defend it to the last breath, even when defeat was certain? And what does the silence that followed the last shot fired on Iwo Jima still whisper to us 80 years later? This is not a story of heroes and flags alone. This is a story of strategy, suffering, and a terrible price paid for a place most Americans could never find on a globe. It is early 1945. The tide of war in the Pacific has turned decisively against Imperial Japan. The once expanding empire has been pushed back island by island as the United States pursues a relentless campaign of island hopping. Admiral Chester Nimitz's strategy is both surgical and brutal. Ignore what can be bypassed. Seize only what is needed for the final approach to the Japanese home islands. In November 1943, the Americans took Tarawa. Then came the Marshalls, and then the Marianas, each name added to a growing list of hard-won victories marked by high costs. By late 1944, the landings at Peleliu had offered a grim lesson that even small islands could bleed armies white. And yet, the next target loomed. An island halfway between Tokyo and the massive B-29 air bases in the Marianas. A small, rugged volcano named Iwo Jima. Just 7.2 kilometers long and at most 4 kilometers wide, Iwo Jima was nothing more than a sulfuric wart in the ocean. But strategically, it was priceless. From Iwo, American P-51 Mustangs could escort the B-29 bombers on their deadly missions to Tokyo. Damaged planes could land there instead of crashing into the sea. And, critically, it was Japanese home territory. The island fell under the jurisdiction of Tokyo Prefecture. The decision was made. Operation Detachment would involve 3 Marine divisions, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, totaling over 100,000 men. 700 ships would support the assault. American planners hoped the island could be taken in 5 to 10 days. Waiting for them was one man who would ensure they paid for every meter in blood. General Kuribayashi Tadamichi had studied the American method of assault. He knew that beach defenses only delayed the inevitable. Instead, he devised a defense in depth, a deadly lattice of tunnels, pillboxes, and underground strongholds that turned the island itself into a weapon. There would be no glorious banzai charges, no suicidal beach standoffs. Kuribayashi ordered every soldier to kill 10 Americans before dying. He prepared to fight, not for victory, but for attrition. February 19. Day. American battleships began a 3-day bombardment, far short of the 10 days requested. But as the first waves of Marines came ashore at 9 a.m., resistance was strangely light. Then, the ground exploded. Kuribayashi had waited, and now unleashed his pre-sighted artillery, bracketing the beaches with horrifying precision. Mount Suribachi to the south and the quarry to the east rained down machine gun and mortar fire. The volcanic ash terrain made movement almost impossible. The Marines were trapped in the open, bulldozers clearing just enough space for the first units to threaten Airfield No. 1. Colonel Harry Liversedge, leading the 28th Regiment, radioed grimly, "Resistance moderate, but terrain awful." By nightfall, only 1/3 of the objectives for Day 1 had been secured. It was just the beginning. February 20th, D+1. Airfield No. 1 fell into Marine hands, but that small victory masked a darkening horizon. Elsewhere, the Japanese began to stiffen their defense. The quarry on the eastern flank became a nightmare of interlocking machine gun fire. At Mount Suribachi, the 28th Marines fought their way around the volcanic base, encircling it, but not yet conquering it. Kuribayashi sent out a renewed command. Each man should think of his position as his graveyard. Fight to the last, and take many with you. On D+2, February 21st, the island added a new enemy: weather. Rain and wind closed the beaches, crippling resupply efforts. Kamikaze pilots descended from the skies and struck American ships, sinking an escort carrier offshore. The volcanic terrain, already treacherous, became a viscous soup. Weapon jammed, boots stuck in black mud, visibility plummeted. By the end of just 3 days, over 5,000 Marines were dead or wounded. Entire companies were wiped out. One unit of 240 men was reduced to 18 survivors. The Reserve Division, the 3rd Marines, was sent in ahead of schedule. On D+3, the rain persisted. Marines reported weapons reduced to single-shot rifles by dust and water. But still, they advanced. The 28th Marines began the final push up Mount Suribachi. Elsewhere, the other divisions smashed into Kuribayashi's first major defensive belt. It was unlike anything they had seen. The surface of Iwo Jima was only the beginning. Below, Kuribayashi had carved a labyrinth of war. Tunnels interconnected hundreds of fortified positions, pillboxes disguised in rock, sniper holes hidden in crevices, and bunkers reinforced against anything short of a direct naval hit. Japanese soldier Tsuji Akikusa later described the southern island's naval air station headquarters. It was the largest bunker on the island, enough to house 800 people. There were more than 500 drums of fuel, oil, and water. It could hold for 3 months. With this subterranean network, Kuribayashi's men could move undetected, reappear at will, and counterattack under cover of night. To counter this, American artillery fired illumination shells, artificial day brought to night, bathing the island in ghostly white. February 23rd, D+4. Mount Suribachi was surrounded. The Japanese defenders, now cut off, began to retreat through tunnels to the north. At 10:30 a.m., a Marine patrol reached the summit. After a brief skirmish, they raised a small American flag. A few hours later, a second, larger flag replaced it, and with it, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured a moment that would echo through time. The iconic image of 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman hoisting the flag atop Suribachi, a symbol of valor, sacrifice, and the terrible cost still to come. Because Suribachi was not the end. It was the edge of a nightmare that would stretch for 30 more days. The very next day, February 24th, U.S. forces began the assault on Airfield No. 2. But this new battlefield was a maze of landmines and anti-tank guns. Tanks became useless. It was now the work of infantrymen, crawling forward with grenades, flamethrowers, and rifles. In the west, gains were made. In the east, the 4th Marines finally cleared the quarry, only to face something worse. On D+6, the eastern assault slammed into a zone the men would come to call the meat grinder. It was a 3-part complex: Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the amphitheater, a low basin surrounded by ridgelines bristling with guns. Every machine gun, mortar, and tank in the area had overlapping fields of fire. Any advance was met with a hurricane of steel. The Marines measured their progress in touchdowns, advances of 100 yards at a time. A bloody sport with no winners. On February 27th, the situation did not improve. Cave entrances were crushed by tank treads. Zippo Shermans belched flames into bunkers. And still, the Japanese refused to break. Soldier Okoshi Harunori described the horror. Even if you pretended to be dead, American tanks would roll over you. Those in foxholes were crushed alive. You would gurgle until you died. The American High Command had expected victory by February 28th. Instead, that day brought more blood, more mud, more death. Major General Harry Schmidt ordered a new push through the center. A massive artillery barrage cleared the way. At last, Airfield No. 2 fell. But the price? Unmeasurable. March 1st, D+10. American forces now pressed deeper into the island. To the west, the 5th Marines slammed against Nishi Ridge, another fortress carved into the volcanic stone. To the east, progress was agonizingly slow. Hill 382 had been partially taken, but Turkey Knob and the amphitheater still rained death on every approach. As Marine casualties mounted, a quiet shift unfolded within the ranks. Non-commissioned officers, and even privates, began leading their units. The lines between command and survival blurred. March 2nd. D+11. The central advance slowed. The Japanese defenders now dug in along hills. 362B and 362C fought with unrelenting ferocity. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. Hand-to-hand combat became the norm. Bayonets, knives, fists. The ground itself soaked with blood. March 3rd. D+12. The numbers told a grim tale. 3,000 Marines dead. 13,000 wounded. The Japanese losses were staggering. 14,000 dead, and yet 7,000 still remained. Men who had watched their comrades die and now stood, ready to face the same end. To the west, the Marines captured Nishi-Ridgen Hill 362A. In the east, they finally surrounded the amphitheater. But new horrors emerged. Deception was now a weapon. Snipers dressed in American uniforms, wielding captured M1 rifles, infiltrated U.S. lines. Japanese corpses were booby-trapped, rigged to explode upon recovery. It was not war. It was annihilation. March 4th and 5th brought a rare pause. Schmidt ordered 2 days of rest, reinforcing the lines and bringing in replacements. But the fresh troops were green, barely trained, never tested. They joined veterans who had not slept in days, who flinched at shadows and trembled with combat fatigue, what we now know as PTSD. On March 6th, D+15, a massive artillery barrage began at dawn. 22,500 shells were fired in the first hour. And yet, the results were bitterly disappointing. Kuribayashi's men had learned. They knew the rhythm of American assault. Bombardment, then infantry. So they waited, survived, and struck back. March 7th. A new tactic. General Graves Erskine of the 3rd Division launched a surprise attack at 5 a.m., no artillery. The assault angled into a Japanese sector facing the 4th Division, a direction they did not expect. The gamble paid off. By nightfall, Hill 362C was in American hands. But it also birthed a new problem. The assault created a wedge, and in that pocket, a dense core of Japanese resistance remained. It would be named Cushman's Pocket. At midnight came madness. Captain Inoue Samaji, defying Kuribayashi's orders, led 1,500 men in a suicidal banzai charge from Tachiwa Point. They aimed to break through U.S. lines, destroy supplies, and raise the Japanese flag atop Suribachi once more. Some were armed with bamboo spears. Others wore explosive vests. The Marines met them with machine guns, mortars, and flame. Few Americans died. The attackers were obliterated. The next morning, the ground was still smoking. The banzai charge had gained nothing. It was the last gasp of offensive action from the east. March 8th to 10th. D+17 to 19. The meat grinder finally broke. American tanks and infantry closed the noose. In the north, a Marine patrol reached the sea, only to be pushed back. Kuribayashi now knew. The end was near, but he refused to surrender. He radioed Tokyo. All surviving fighting units have sustained heavy losses. I am very sorry that I have let the enemy occupy part of Japanese territory, but I take comfort in the heavy damage we have inflicted. March 11th, D+20. Japanese resistance remained in 3 locations. Cushman's Pocket, a section of the eastern coast, and a gorge in the northwest. It would become known as Bloody Gorge. Kuribayashi and his final 1,500 men retreated into it. They knew it would be their tomb. The Marines, too, were near breaking. Many were so mentally shattered they could not hold rifles. So, leaflets were dropped. Loudspeakers broadcast messages of surrender. Prisoners spoke into radios, pleading with their comrades to lay down arms. One message, written by Momoda Hideo, a captured Japanese officer, read, "Comrades, I never believed things could be this way until I saw it myself. At first, I was ashamed to be captured, but when I saw other officers had also survived, I felt better. We all agree. It is more honorable to live for the Emperor and rebuild Japan than to die like rats underground." But few listened. On March 14th, U.S. commanders declared the island secure. It was a lie. Kuribayashi still held out in his blockhouse, a fortress so deep that American artillery couldn't reach it without risking friendly fire. So Marines went in, with flamethrowers, grenades, and demolition charges. Cave by cave, tunnel by tunnel. Burning, blasting, burying. On March 23rd, Kuribayashi sent his final message. "To all officers and men of Chichijima, goodbye from Iwo. His fate remains a mystery. Some say he committed suicide. Others claim he died leading one last banzai charge." On March 26th, a final Japanese assault, 200 to 300 men, struck Airfield Number 2. It targeted airmen, engineers, and support staff. The Americans crushed it in minutes. The battle was over. D+35. March 26th, 1945. Silence finally descended over Iwo Jima. In just over 1 month, the United States Marine Corps suffered nearly 23,000 casualties. 6,800 Marines were dead. The U.S. Navy added another 2,800 killed or wounded. On the Japanese side, only 216 surrendered. 19,000 were killed outright. As many as 2,000 remained in hiding, emerging weeks later, starved, delirious, but still prepared to fight. It was, by any measure, a battle of unspeakable loss. And unlike almost every other engagement in the Pacific War, this time, American casualties outnumbered Japanese. The capture of Iwo Jima brought with it debate. Some in the U.S. Army and Navy later questioned the necessity of the operation. The island, they argued, was too costly. Its strategic value overstated. But on the cold numbers, that judgment becomes murky. Over the final months of the war, 2,251 B-29 bombers made emergency landings on Iwo Jima. Those landings likely saved the lives of 24,000 American airmen. For those pilots falling from the skies over Japan, Iwo Jima was not a symbol. It was salvation. And yet, there was something deeper that lingered in the American consciousness. The flag atop Mount Suribachi became an icon, a moment captured in stillness. Even as the island it stood on continued to bleed. Final reflection, the cliffhanger. In the years that followed, Iwo Jima became more than a battle. It became a question. How much is victory worth? When every meter of ground must be bought with the lives of men barely old enough to shave, what is the cost of turning an island into a graveyard, a symbol, and a myth all at once? Was Iwo Jima a victory? Or was it a warning? Kuribayashi had written before the battle began. The life of a single soldier is heavier than a mountain. And perhaps that is the legacy. Not the flag, not the numbers, but the echo of footsteps on black sand, and the knowledge that even the smallest island can reveal the deepest truths about war, sacrifice, and the human spirit. We may never know Kuribayashi's exact fate, but we know this. He did not surrender, and neither did the story of Iwo Jima. It remains unfinished. If you found this episode of Legacy Files meaningful, we invite you to subscribe, reflect, and share your thoughts below. History lives in the questions we still ask.